The United States House of Representatives prepares to pick its next leader this week as Israel seems prepared to go to war against Palestine after Hamas launched a surprise attack on the country over the weekend. The fighting in the Middle East is increasing pressures on American lawmakers to select a new speaker. This week, as questions about what the House can do to aid and support Israel without a speaker in place loom large, The Hill reports.
House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Mychael McCall stressed the importance of electing a speaker in order to replenish funding for Israel. He said, quote, "We have to get a speaker elected this week so we can get things on the floor like replenishing the Iron Dome, get a resolution that Ranking Member Gregory Meeks and I have been working on, a bipartisan resolution condemning Hamas for what they have done to Israel." Amidst this race for Speaker, Representative Nancy Mace weighed in on past sexual assault allegations that Jim Jordan has faced from Ohio State University and how this might affect her view of him as he vies for the speakership.
I know you've been outspoken about defending victims of sexual assault. Do the past allegations against Jim Jordan that he turned a blind eye to sexual abuse give you any reservations?
I'm not familiar or aware with that. He's not indicted on anything that I'm aware of, and so I don't know anything and can't speak to that. But I will say that I have been, as you said, Margaret, I don't know anything, and I don't know anything about that. What I do know is that I've been a very strong voice for women. I've talked to Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise about that. I've been a very strong advocate for rape victims. As you mentioned earlier, the Judiciary Committee, with him as chairman, recently passed a rape kit bill that Barbara Lee and I are working on. And those are the facts and the data that I have to work with, and I've had a very positive experience with him in that regard.
The Hill's Mychael Schnell joins us now to weigh in on all of this. Welcome, Mychael.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so this conflict that has emerged over the weekend puts pressure on the House Republicans to come to some resolution over the speakership battle. But just because more pressure looms large doesn't necessarily mean anything has really changed on the ground. What's your sense of the likelihood of getting a replacement to McCarthy this week?
Yeah, look, you put it like that exactly. So while the pressure may be increasing and while lawmakers may hope to come to some sort of resolution when it comes to filling the role of speaker this week, they may hope that. But the reality in Washington is oftentimes that things move slower than expected. So that may not come to fruition. So there were a few lawmakers on the Sunday show circuit yesterday saying that they were hopeful that the process would not take very long, that they wanted to move through this quickly. People like Congressman Matt Gaetz, Congressman Byron Donalds. But the reality of it is that neither candidate currently running for speaker, Steve Scalise or Jim Jordan, neither of them have a clear path to winning the gavel. They've both received a number of endorsements from different lawmakers, but still, because of that split support among the conference, neither one right now has a clear path to winning. So with that reality, it is possible that we will see the Republican conference take maybe a few days to come to some sort of consensus. Current conference rules say that just the individual who has a majority of support within the conference moves on to the House floor with that nomination. Some lawmakers are pushing to change conference rules to say that you have to have at least a majority of the chamber, which in this case would be 217 votes within the Republican conference before moving to the floor. That, of course, would prevent that multi-ballot race that we saw happen back in January. It would essentially put this last-minute wrangling, keep it behind closed doors with the conference. Whether or not that will end up happening and be reality remains to be seen. But yeah, look, there are still disagreements within the conference about who the next speaker should be, regardless of the situation in Israel. However, I will say that lawmakers do want to move quickly through it because of that situation. Whether or not they'll actually be able to, we'll have to see that in the coming days.
Right. Many lawmakers clearly want to move quickly, some, in the Republican Party. But of course, we can't overlook that part of McCarthy's downfall, right, was because Matt Gaetz had issues with the prioritization of funding for Ukraine. So it's interesting now that the idea we would need to come together and have a new speaker so that there could quickly prioritize funding for Israel. I'm sure that's going to rub. I think that's going to rub some Republicans the wrong way, although maybe Republican primary viewers, some of them see these two things differently? Are suspicious of funding Ukraine and not of Israel? Are we seeing, the Matt Gaetzes of the world having a kind of policy impact on this discussion for what commitments, whether it's Jordan or Scalise, are going to have to Gaetz and to Republican primary voters?
So I haven't exactly seen that yet, and by and large, we've seen lawmakers of all stripes, Democrats and Republicans, say that the U.S. needs to continue to support Israel, send it as much aid as it needs, stick by its side. Of course, Israel, one of the U.S.'s closest allies. So I haven't seen yet that discrepancy about that maybe skepticism about this foreign aid. But you bring up sort of the side by side when you have aid to Ukraine and aid to Israel now with the situation that's developing in the Middle East. I will note that, of course, Israel is one of the U.S.'s closest allies. And historically speaking, particularly Republicans have been very pro-Israel, very supportive of supporting Israel. So I suspect that we'll see that continue in the wake of this most recent conflict in the Middle East. And then when you talk about Ukraine, that is sort of on its own footing these days. Of course, the topic of aid to Ukraine has become this hot button lightning rod issue within the Republican conference, really bitterly dividing the Republican Party at large, to be quite honest. A number of lawmakers increasingly skeptical of sending more aid to Ukraine. We saw that vote just last month where more Republicans actually voted against sending more aid to Ukraine rather than than in favor of it. So I think when you set these two issues, aid to Ukraine and aid to Israel, side by side, they do bear some similarities, of course, both aid to foreign countries. But I think that, Republicans are likely going to stand by Israel and continue to send aid and support for as long as it's needed because of that historic nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship, while something like Ukraine, that has sort of developed into this hot-button issue that's really bitterly divided the Republican conference.
Hey, Michael, I take your point about the historic nature of the relationship, and certainly every establishment politician has echoed that line since the fighting started over the weekend. But it's also true that trends have been shifting pretty radically on this. According to an Associated Press Nork Center for Public Affairs research poll that came out just last month, about 4 in 10 Americans described Israel as a partner with which the U.S. should cooperate, but they also said the country does not share U.S. interests and values. Only about 3 in 10 said Israel is an ally that shares U.S. interests. Republicans, as you mentioned, are more likely than Democrats to call Israel an ally. But in light of the $3 billion a year that Americans send to Israel, and given the nature of the critique that's being leveraged against the funding to Ukraine, which is why does the money flow out the door so easily to these international endeavors, but never domestically, it will be interesting to see if any of this gets implicated in the ongoing fight over the speakership race. What do you make also, before you leave, of the for lack of a better word, sex scandal with respect to Jim Jordan? Do you think that's going to meaningfully impact his chances? Are you seeing pattern of that outside of kind of the liberal sphere of that clip that we played earlier here?
I don't think that we'll see that affect the situation. Those allegations have, of course, been in the media and been in conversations for a while now. That's not something new. That's not a new revelation. It's been in the conversations about Jim Jordan for years. I mean, since that's been known, so I don't see it having a particular impact on the speaker's race right now. I think that I don't see it having much of an influence.
Yeah, I don't either. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.